Hello, and welcome to the Cubase 9.5 new features video from StreamWorks Audio. Now, my name's Walt Honeycutt. I will be your host and instructor for about the next 90 minutes or so as we walk through all of the new features that Steinberg has added to Cubase in version 9.5. Now, I'm going to group those somewhat arbitrarily into two sets of 6 that I'm going to call big stuff and little stuff. And the first feature up in the big stuff category for me is Flux. This is the new synthesizer that they've added. Well, technically it's a new synth engine within the Halion Sonic SE VST plugin, but it's a wavetable synth. First time that Steinberg has fielded one of those, and it comes with a whole host of new controls, but a whole host of new capabilities too. So we'll look at Flux in detail. Direct offline processing. This is an entirely different way to interact with your effects and your audio processes, and we'll take a look at that in detail. And I would say if there were only 2 things to know about Cubase 9.5, these are those 2 things. I mean, it's worth the upgrade just for that. You can now drag a MIDI part into the sampler track to create an audio version of it in one shot, which is really handy when you've got the perfect loop in MIDI, but you want to use your audio tools to work with it and so forth. There's one little kind of landmine in there, though, that we'll take a look at, one little trick to be aware of. Several automation upgrades. They gave you a lot more granularity on the curves and the ability to do spot automation, which has been missing for a long time. The Metronome has been upgraded. A lot more sounds, much more capability to make it a human feel, make it follow changing key signatures and stuff. And if you're working with performers in a traditional studio environment, having a non-irritating metronome is key sometimes. So that's a huge help for folks working with vocalists in particular. And then they've added file browser to the right-hand zone, which doesn't seem like a really big thing, but it does speed up workflow and it keeps you in the one window more of the time. Then over on the little stuff side, they renamed the devices menu to the studio menu. And I understand that. It probably makes more sense, but this is just going to irritate the heck out of you for a while if you've been working with Cubase for any length of time. They've added a bunch of production presets, especially in the vocal arena and mastering. So if you're relatively new to either of those, you can just grab one of the production presets and it'll configure your whole channel strip for you and give you something, a baseline to start with and tweak from there. There's a Smart Snap Smart Grid now, so as you zoom in and out of your project, the grid sort of comes to you. It'll morph to whatever level of magnification you're working in. There's a lot more inserts available in the channel settings editor, and you can slide the pre and post dividing point around in real time. You've got what I call a new paint job on most of the more recent effects, and not only is it a new paint job, but they made them larger. The meters are bigger, so there's more functionality there. You can see stuff a little bit better. And they've added a few new sidechain features and some different drive algorithms and things. And then finally, under the hood, there are a couple of engine enhancements. The effects are all mixed in 64-bit now. They've added a new kind of updated video engine and support for the soft tube console one, which, to be honest with you, I've not really heard much about. But if you have one of those, it's now fully supported. All right, so before we dive the rest of the way in, just a couple of disclaimers. One, I am a keyboard guy, so I will apologize to the guitarists in the audience up front. Most of my examples are going to be keyboard driven. Second, these videos are decidedly geared towards the musician crowd, so the straight up engineering crowd may not get as much out of, say, the chapter on Flux as they will out of direct offline processing. And speaking of those two, our first 2 topics, we are going to do a little bit of academics on the front end so that you can break through the vocabulary barrier and figure out how the concept works before we get into how the plugin works. So without further delay, let's take a look up close and personal at Flux.